Thursdays at 11 a.m. are our QT conversations. And once a month, I get the chance to run it as a book club, which means that we focus on one of my favorite books from my bookshelf, usually not something that's not too long and quite digestible. And I don't require anybody else to have read it because I will tell you what it says. So just for context, my degree was English and philosophy, and I do not get to talk about books as much as I would like to, except with my awesome teenagers who are also book nerds. But today I am blessed to have the book nerds of the QT community with me. Jan, Jenna, and Rosanna are exactly the people that I want to have this conversation with about this particular book. But before I do that, I would love to just ask you each to tell me what you get from these conversations, because there's something magical that happens here. Rosanna, would you mind starting?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've talked about this many times before, but tutoring can be a really lonely profession. So just the chance to come together and bounce ideas off other people, talk about the things that we might see as common struggles can be really helpful because it's so easy when you're self-employed as well to just feel like the things you're going through are unique to you and it's this challenge that you're having because there's some kind of problem with you. And then actually when you talk to people who are having similar struggles or similar experiences, even not necessarily negative ones, just makes you feel less lonely and less isolated, and it kind of makes you realize that there are certain things that are just part and parcel of the job that aren't necessarily a problem with you. It's just something that everyone's facing as a challenge. And then of course there's a practical element to that as well, which is that you can bounce ideas off of each other in terms of strategies to deal with those challenges and those experiences that you're having. So I find that very beneficial and helpful.
I agree with you, and we're going to be not at all practical today, so sorry about that.
That's fine.
But I do love that you said not just the hard stuff, not just the troubles, right? Because there's a culture thing here, and if we're only griping, we will bring each other down. And in order to make sure that we are moving upwards together, we have to make sure that we are having uplifting conversations as well. And that's my goal here today. Jan, what do you benefit from in these conversations?
Yeah, I actually really agree with what Rosanna said. For me, every Thursday, it's actually the only chance that I can really talk about tutoring with other tutors in a group. Usually, yeah, since now I'm building my own business fun class, so I have to reach out to a lot of tutors, but usually it's mainly about business, not really about all the things that matter for tutors, for tutoring for students. That's something I feel very grateful that yeah, I'm in this community talk with everyone.
Gosh, I'm going to hold on to that. The things that matter to tutors, something really meaty about that idea about what matters to us. And, marketing matters here and pedagogy matters here, but boosting confidence matters here. And there are even higher levels that maybe we'll reach today. That's gorgeous. Jenna, go ahead.
What was the question again?
The
Sorry.
question was, so you're absolutely right. I teed it up for Rosanna and Jan. The question was, what do you benefit from in these conversations before we start diving in?
Well, my favorite one is I always feel really cozy and comforted, and like I've had a big hug after most of these conversations, and that is absolutely something I really need today.
I appreciate that. And I hope that you come out with that feeling. That big hug vibe is something that I'm really proud of around here. My kids tell me that of all the Harry Potter houses, I'm actually a Hufflepuff, which I didn't know, but I'm very pleased with. So let's start. So we've covered an alternation of books in the book club over the last few months, and we tend to balance between business practices, so like small business books like Build a Kitchen from Your Kitchen Table, which is created by the Not on the High Street team, and that was like a very sort of personal, heartfelt exploration of what it means to build a business as a woman without the corporate structures behind them and the personal development and the strategies behind that, and that was helpful. And then we've looked at teaching books. So we looked at my favorite, which is Ken Robinson's Imagine If, where he talks about it's actually his final book and it was finished by his daughter after he passed away. And if you have a chance to read it, you need it in hard copy and in audio, because listening to her read her father's words is very, very beautiful. So we've been alternating between those two heads that we have as tutors, the freelancer and the educator. And there's those parallel conversations are what really defines qualified tutor and the qualified tutor community, the conversations that we have. But then sometimes we get really personal. We get social and we share pictures of our pets. We talk about struggles or joys or what we've done on bank holiday. And then we sort of drop into a different space. And that's what I would like to explore today. I would like to think about us as whole people and how that affects our tutoring. So the book that we're looking at is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I just need to know, Rosanna, Jenna, Jan, have you seen this book before or heard of it? No,
No, I'd
not
love to
sure.
know more.
Good. Okay. This is it's a classic and it's well worth you reading at the same time. So I'm just looking to see when it was first published. It says 1988, which to me does not sound like a classic because that was like yesterday in my in my life. But you will see lots of authors and artists referring to Julia Cameron. She's sort of the artist's coach. And the first thing to clarify is that when we talk about artists, we're actually talking about a mindset. We are not necessarily talking about the practice of painting or writing music or writing books. We're much more thinking about that creative space and what it allows us to tap into in ourselves. And that's really where I want to get to today. So let's start off with this question. Creativity, what does it mean for you? Rosanna?
I would say the first word that came to mind for me was freedom, or at the very least not being restricted by structures that are too rigid. So the ability, I think, to put your own spin on something. It might be within the confines of a structure, which is okay, but not too limited, if that makes sense. So I think it's the ability to put your own kind of personal touch on things, I suppose.
That's beautiful. And I think that question about how much structure you need in order to be creative is something that there's a lot of thinking behind. Jenna, what does creativity mean to you?
Curiosity and letting it happen in whatever way that might be at the time.
Sorry, somebody is distracting me who's on half term and nagging me for screen, and the answer is going to be no for this entire hour. Human life. Jan, can you tell me a little bit about what creativity means to you, please?
Yeah, I think like people always think that creativity means something new, but I don't think like creativity is always about something completely new, but it's also about the things you have experienced and then you reassemble them into a new way. So it's not like something completely new.
That's beautiful. I love that idea of reassembly. It makes me think of Lego. And I don't know if you follow, there's somebody on LinkedIn who makes these stop-start animations. I can't find his name because it will distract me, but he works with the Lego company. And I just saw today one that was an animation of Lego and space. So he had a little astronaut and he had a thing that was spinning. And did you see it, Jenna? Can you see?
I saw like a small clip of it and I was like, if I go and watch this, I'm going to be so distracted because I think I know who you're talking about. I love it.
Would you mind taking a second to find his name? Because if I do, I'm going to get lost in LinkedIn. But what's gorgeous about him, and I always think this, is can you imagine what that guy was like as a kid? Right. So this guy makes start animation, and hopefully he's making some money because he's working for Lego. And he does lots of lovely behind the scenes, so you get to sort of learn how he's doing the thing. And I've actually even read some really interesting articles where he's explained how he actually faked what he was doing, and so there becomes layers and layers of him exploring his creativity. Now, to me, when I first saw him, I was like, imagine what this kid was like in school. His teachers told him to sit down and shut up. I am so sure of it that this kid was a bouncing off the wall, disruptive, distracted person who has found his way. And that's really interesting when we talk about creativity as a sort of, how welcome is it? How welcome is it in childhood? How welcome is it in our day-to-day lives? So I'm going to answer the question for myself about what creativity means to me. And after lots and lots of years of thinking about this, for me, creativity is meditation. So I drop into a space when I'm creative where the outcome is irrelevant. So this weekend we took our kids to the Natural History Museum in Tring, which, if you've been there, is a really morbid place because it is a collection of stuffed animals from the Victorian times from all over the world. But you have these tiny glass cases full of real full size lions or zebras or like an entire pride of lions. So you'll have cubs that have been hunted and killed and emptied and stuffed. And, it's a very overwhelming experience to go to this place. But my daughter is doing her GCSE art, and she's doing death in nature, which is a fantastic theme. So my 14-year-old daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, and I stood sketching all these little lovely animals. And I did a wolf and I did an eagle. And it doesn't matter about the outcome for me. I put the paper in the bin. For me, it was about being in that relaxed space, that headspace. So let's go around it again and ask the question, what gets you into the creative headspace, Rosanna?
I think going back to what Jan was talking about, how it doesn't have to be something radically new or completely different. It's a kind of synthesis of different ideas. And I think giving myself the space to think about that away from the day-to-day humdrum life that we can often find ourselves, caught up in. So breaking away from routine can sometimes help. I often find that, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but my most creative ideas come to me when I'm not doing anything particularly important. Like I'll be doing the dishes, or I'll be in the shower, or I'll be like cleaning the house, and it's like I just have this sudden spark and I kind of run with that, really. So it's never when I'm sat at a desk like, right, I'm going to be creative now. It tends to be more spontaneous. If I'm out on a walk, if I'm doing something different, I'm away from my normal routine.
Totally. I really relate to that. And I've just had a concept for marketing showers. Why has nobody marketed showers as the best place to have ideas? That was such a good campaign. Yeah, I'm just come and let me know if you want to buy that idea from me, shower people. So what do we just say? So there's a few things there. There's something about time and space and being out of routine. And there's pros and cons to that, which we will unpack in a second. I think also that thing about sort of doing something with your hands, right? So the washing up, or I'm taking care. There is something ADHD-ish in this about separating the different parts of your brain and having part of your brain taken care of so the rest of you can be relaxed. Jenna, does that resonate with you? Do you have lots of reading to explain this? Again, so how if you're doing something with your hands, the rest of you is sort of free to wander. The rest of your mind is free to wander.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to learn about how it works. And at one point I went into the whole like actual neuroscience behind some of it. And there's some really fascinating like fMRI studies into
what is fMRI?
Functional MRIs.
Okay, yeah, got it.
I can't remember what the M and R stand for, but the I stands for imaging.
Thank you. Go on.
And it's fascinating. I can't remember any of the studies off the top of my head, but my answer to the other question is 3 things: dog walking,
yeah,
my sessions with young people, and I can't remember what I was going to say for the third thing. Oh, podcasts.
Why?
When I listen to podcasts mostly when I'm driving, because it makes my driving better, and I have to listen to podcasts at a minimum of 2 times speed to make my ADHD brain keep up and not like zone out. Yeah, and I love a mixture of random podcasts, and I end up having to phone. I've got an arrangement with my PA now that I phone her when I'm driving, and I'm listening to podcasts with like a million ideas to put into my ideas book, because I have an ideas book. I have 3
volumes. Yeah. Okay, so and Jan, the same question to you about how to get into that creative space.
Yeah, I think when you have a lot of experience, you would have like a larger tool set that you can pull them from in order to create or assemble something together new. So yeah, I think definitely expose yourself to as much as possible to the things you're learning, you're curious about. Like for example, recently I've been teaching mythology to my students, and then we are reading mythology stories from all around the world, like from Africa, from Latin America, from Oceania, everything. And at the end of the course, I asked the students to write a creation myth of yourself. And I see the students have assembled a lot of elements from the myth of all of like the world, different cultures into one piece. And that's creativity in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful. It reminds me, and it's so lovely that Dee's here listening. I won't put you on the spot unless you're available to talk, but Dee and I have spoken about using AI. Oh, hello. We have spoken about using AI as a way to just fill a blank page so that you can then change every single word or just tweak it, but basically to use it so that you have material to work with. And that's what Jan's describing in terms of learning lots and lots of different creation myths before you give a child their own one to do. It's also a scaffold, isn't it? So it gives you structures. So let's unpack structures and freedoms in creativity for a second. So there are two basic tools that Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way uses. And I've actually lived both of them before, and they're very, very helpful. One is called Morning Pages. And she says every morning, freestyle, 3 pages. And it doesn't have to do anything and it doesn't have to go anywhere. And for me, what I found that it does is clear my head. And it's a practice. Right. So there are lots of fantastic books on the creative practice. One is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he says there, if you want the muse to find you, you have to be in the same place every day. So there is something about practice that enables creativity. So let's talk about journaling for a second. Is that something that you've had experience with? Dee, you're unmuted. So can I call on you first?
Yeah, I have got the book and I did start reading it and I did do morning pages for a while and I found it really, really hard. Really hard. And I stuck with it and I thought it's gonna get easier if I stick with it. And the stuff got in the way, and journaling for me isn't something that comes naturally anyway. So I've tried to explore and find ways that might unlock it as a therapy tool for me. And after I was widowed, I ended up doing a poetry course in an effort to try and unlock it that way. And it did, and it served its purpose for a while. I don't write any more poetry because it dealt with that part of my life, yeah, and the trauma that I'd been through. But I love what's been said already about creativity not necessarily being about creating something new. And as you said, we've talked about AI producing something which you might then, completely may not resemble it by the time you finished with it, but it gives you a starting point. And the word creativity for me has always filled me with terror because I haven't felt that I am a creative person, which is why I then explored learning how to classically draw and to paint in oils because of a poster I saw on the wall at the Classical Art Academy, which said, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? And it shouted, come on. And then I learned that there was scaffold, there were structures that you could use to learn how to classically draw, that with a good tutor who could teach you how to mix paint, how to apply it, how to blend it, how to start a painting, that I could actually unlock some of my creativity. But it takes a huge amount of effort on my part to want to put me in that place. I still find it really, really scary. I'm down the end of the garden, the summer house that we have built that my husband works in, that was supposed to be my painting place as well. I haven't actually done more than about half an hour's worth of painting in there because I haven't made it part of my routine and it's not somewhere I naturally gravitate to. So creativity for me has been about, in my job, taking other people's resources and adapting them to suit what I'm doing. So today I had a session, third of only four I'm doing with a year 7 student. And I just screenshotted little bits and dropped them into the bit paper, and used those as the scaffolding to do the teaching, because creating something from scratch fills me with too much time. I don't feel I have the skills to come up with something. I'm going to use everybody else's skills and then use my skills as a tutor to adapt those to the students that I'm working with. That was a very rambling answer, and I can't even remember
No,
what the
it
first
was
question
beautiful. And what you see me doing is taking notes because of all the threads that you're touching on that we can explore, and scariness and the shoulds and the is English more creative than maths as a subject tutor? And for me, there's also that beautiful phrase that you use about unlocking your creativity, which presumes that you had creativity there all along. So with your permission, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the second half of this conversation into children, into education, and into thinking about the value of creativity with children. But I do want to just do Julia Cameron's service and tell you what the second tool that I wanted to share with you here was, and that is artist dates. So Dee, did you try an artist date?
I don't think I got that far.
Okay. So she talks about morning pages, and she talks about taking yourself on a date as an artist, and that might be to a gallery, and it might be to a beach, and it really can be anywhere that inspires your creative mind. And I have found that taking myself for a walk in London, and sometimes I go to art galleries, and sometimes I literally just smile at people in the street as I wander around, does the trick for me. It makes me feel relaxed and meditative and curious and inspired, and it makes me notice the complexity of the natural world, or how much people achieve by building buildings and all the different workspaces. Or you walk past a cafe and you think there's somebody in the kitchen who's prepared an entire menu here in case I want to sit down and order something. What's that beautiful word? Sonder. Okay, so this is gorgeous. The word sonder means that moment when you notice that everybody else has a life too, and that this moment is an intersection of everybody's life. And for me, wandering through London feels like just noticing that, just being in that headspace of noticing all the life and the creativity around me. So artist dates are something that I have as a strategy when I need it, and sometimes it takes half a day, and sometimes it's really just 20 minutes out of my life if I can get into that place. Rosanna, Jan, does that resonate with you as an experience? Have you ever accidentally taken yourself on an artist date?
Yeah, I think for me, going back to what you were saying about, smiling at people on the street or just going somewhere simple like a coffee shop, that seems to spark my imagination quite a lot, especially if I end up chatting to somebody nearby and you just find that people are very interesting. And just meeting new people, I think, really inspires me because it reminds you that everybody's got their own things going on in life and it draws you closer to others. And I think anything that draws you closer to other people, including these conversations, actually, I think can help you to feel inspired and more creative. So that helps me a lot.
You've absolutely nailed it. I've forgotten that conversations are one of my favorite things for creativity. I really feel that. Okay, so I'm going to draw a bright line through our conversation now, and pivot to the way that we present creativity to our students. And the first question here is, what is the value of creativity? And notice that it's taken us half an hour to sort of drop into this space together. So from here, from this perspective, what is the value of creativity? Jan, can we start with you?
I think creativity is something like we need for everything in the life. Like let it be, let's say, create a campaign for your business or create something new content for our students in terms of our lessons. So I think, yeah, creativity is everywhere, literally, but it might be like a bit unconscious that we're creating something new. Yeah, but I feel like it's something really like essential, indispensable in our life.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dee, what are your thoughts about, I'm thinking about, you just said creativity is really scary for me. And so I signed up for an oil painting course. That the determination to unlock your creativity. Why is creativity important?
Because I felt I was missing out.
Ah,
My I've had a science background my whole life. I did science A levels. I did a meteorology degree, and science is where I'm happy and comfortable. Um, my mum was arty, and she was, semi-professional on the stage, and my middle sister is an actor, and my youngest sister is a primary school deputy head, and they're much more arty. Back in 1995, I did an arts foundation course through the Open University when I was in the Navy, because the Navy were going to pay for it. So that was great, because I wanted to unlock conversations with my family.
oh,
Um, and it did, because we did literature, we did art, we did history, we did philosophy. It was and it opened conversations, especially when I had to get my middle sister to help me write an essay. And she wrote reams and reams and reams, because I hadn't hit the word limit. And she sent me this essay, and I said, "But you said the same thing more than once." She said, "Yeah, and I was a scientist who did staff writing in the Navy, and I used, short sentences, and I said things once." But creativity for me as an educator for my math students, I had an experience yesterday with a bright year 9 student. Presented him with a problem which was part of something he was actually doing online. And he hadn't watched the learn video, and he hadn't watched the practice problem pairs, because he thought he could do the questions in the quiz without having to do all of that stuff. And there was this problem, and he started to solve it, and he was reluctant to get going on it. And I said, "Well, just play. It might not take you anywhere, but just play. The maths might not work. You'll find out. You'll know it's a strategy that's not working." And with maths, and the way that it's often taught is about, we give them an algorithm, we give them a structure to solve a particular problem. We then present them with something a bit different, perhaps not in that context, in a different lesson. And they seem frightened to use their creativity, to use the tools that they've got within a framework to explore the problem. And it seems to stem, well, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to have, I don't want to get stuck. I just want to do the problem. So I'm learning more and more about the importance of encouraging them to, okay, I want to try it. Okay, try it. But will it work? I says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just try it. And they're really resistant to it. Really resistant to it.
oh, so
And
beautiful.
I understand it. I understand why, because I'm that way as well. I want the tools. I want to know that I have to hit this nail with a hammer to make it go in. I'm not going to use a screwdriver on it. But
Well,
I'm
hold
perhaps
on,
I'm going to
hold on.
learn more.
That's beautiful. But because specifically your example, your concrete example of the nail and the hammer, you'll break the nail or the piece of wood or the piece of furniture if you use the wrong tool. But with maths, with learning, have a go, come back, try a different route, come back. And showing students, what things are high stakes and what things are not high stakes, and creating low stakes experiences. I mean, again, you've given us so many threads there, and I just want to share with you what I've written down. So the first thing is making connections, and I would suggest that your creativity is actually in the way you think, Dee, because you know how I always say to you that you're so quotable. What happened just then was the four of us in this room just watched you make connections. And those connections are the creative space, making a leap from this thing with me as a child, and it helped me to relate to my family, and then what that means to you as your students having a go with the maths problem. That was a journey that you took us on, yeah? there's something about making leaps and making connections that is about the creative space. And if you come back to problem solving, that's what we notice in our own students. Yeah. So Rosanna, I know that when you have these philosophical conversations with students, you watch them taking leaps in their thinking. And if we then take that and we think about play, which is another thing that you just mentioned there, Dee, we know that we encourage children to play, and we know that early years is all about play. And then there's this horrible moment when the children show up in reception with their little uniforms on, when somebody staples them to a chair and tells them to stay there for the next 10 years of their life. And it is heartbreaking to see that shift happen. And somewhere along that shift, and Ken Robinson mentions this a great deal, somewhere along that shift, judgment happens. So he uses the example of, if you ask a 3-year-old if they can dance, they will all say yes. And if you ask a 13-year-old if they can dance, they will only say yes if they go to the Royal Ballet School. Right? The concept of what dance means becomes something full of judgment and competition and rights and wrongs. Whereas when you ask a 3-year-old about dance, they're like, yeah, I can do that because my body does that. So look at me. The joy of dance, the process of dance. And there's one more thing that I wanted to pull on there, and that was about the process. So getting it wrong becomes really scary. Yeah. And like I mentioned to you before, when I was doodling at the Natural History Museum, I put the sketches in the rubbish bin afterwards because they were irrelevant. The process was what was important to me. And there's something about showing our students to be in that moment and enjoy that process that unlocks something. Rosanna, I've given you tons to work on there. Can you have a go?
Yeah, for sure. Something that I keep coming back to, and Dee, you kind of inspired me to think about this actually, is sometimes the very narrow definition that we have of creativity, where oftentimes we talk about people having a creative spark or creative genius as if it's something inherent, and if you don't have it, you can't get it. And of course, I think, Dee, through your examples and even just the example of like the hammer and the nail and all of that, is like that is creative, but we might not call it that because we've got these very narrow definitions. And yeah, forcing kids to kind of fit into this box. And I agree, it's really heartbreaking to see them grow out of that when they get older and having this fear of making mistakes and all of that. And going back to my conversations with my students, I feel very heartened when I see them not afraid to make those interesting creative connections and not worry about getting it wrong, because a lot of it's quite subjective anyway, especially with the subjects that I teach, because it's English, it's history, it's philosophy. Like, for example, I was teaching a class the other day about religious experiences and how people converting to religion, it can really change their lives. And one of them just put their hand up and said, oh, that reminds me of an episode of Young Sheldon where one of the characters becomes really Christian and it completely and I was like, that's a great example. Like, I love seeing them kind of applying things that they might have been doing for fun to the lesson and saying that, oh yeah, this reminds me of a TV show I saw or a book I read or a film that I like. And it's just really nice that they can draw those connections and not worry about people thinking that's not relevant. Because if you started going off on that kind of tangent at school, then yeah, you would have to come back to that because it's the curriculum and they probably wouldn't like that as much in certain areas. But I think the great thing about tutoring is that you can have those conversations that seem really tangential and maybe not fully connected. And as long as the student's brave enough to do that and not worry about making mistakes, really.
I tell you something that I learned in researching qualification. So, we've created a level 3, and of course I want to create a 4, a 5, a 6, and I'm working on a 7. And what's really interesting, so a level 3 is equivalent to an A level. And there is a recognized qualification framework which sort of explains what those different levels mean and what the nature of them are. GCSE, from GCSE to degree level, the distinction is how creative you'll be with the content, right? So a GCSE student is expected to learn the content, use the content, right? And A level and higher is expected, sort of the way that it's phrased is in less predictable contexts, yeah? Or to take these pieces and make something new out of it. And what we'd seem to do, in the same way that We don't teach year 2 children year 3 maths because they'll be bored when they get to year 3, right? So we slow them down and make them do these steps, which can be argued that there's mastery behind that, and there's benefits in that. But what you've just said about young Sheldon is you've given them a space to be spontaneous with their thinking and take it to a much higher level where it's much less synthetic and actually becomes something unpredictable. Yeah. And if you think about the fact that, you can work with a trainee dentist, you can go to a trainee dentist and they can do the basic work. But if you've got something complicated going on in your mouth, you will need a far more experienced and expert dentist to be able to provide that support. So I wonder whether it's quite interesting to suggest that we've almost left creativity to the top of the pile. But how do you get there if you just kicked it out of the children when they were 3 years old? How do you get back to creativity when you've undermined the nature of it, the need for it? We talk a lot about the industrialized model of education. And again, it's something, if you haven't seen Sugata Mitra's TED Talk, it's called School in the Cloud. The first part of it is really informative to explain how our education system was modeled on the industrialized model, in order to support the British Empire. So because we needed recognizable handwriting and people who would compute numbers and taxes to be shipped all over the world, we created this standardized expectation of education. And that's not what we need now, because we have computers, and beyond that, we have computers that learn. And so what we will need in education becomes something far more creative. Jenna, what are your thoughts?
Lots. I apologize for dipping out. First of all, my dog started choking.
Okay.
I think so. She won't leave my side, but she seems settled now. I think this is a really interesting conversation, because the young people that I work with the most are the young people that are out of school or have been out of school for a long time, and young people who are most affected by this in the young people that I work with.
What was that word, this? What are they affected by?
The whole having creativity taken out of them and taken away from them. And one of the things that comes up a lot is even just thinking about colouring and art and really small things, is this idea that so many of young people, and I mean, even when I was at school, I was always taught that if you're doing something creative, it has to be for value, for purpose, for some specific outcome. It has to be marketable or sellable. And if you do have something creative that you're good at, you have to sell it and turn it into a marketable thing. And, that just takes the fun out of it and puts a price tag on everything. And I think that creativity, you asked earlier what the value of it is. And I think it's humanity. I think it's life, because we wouldn't have any of what we do as a species, as anything, as societies, if we didn't have creativity as such a core thing. And I do think that, I think COVID has changed a few things in terms of, I'm finding more families, more educators in general, starting to ignore this whole remove creativity from education thing and just putting it back in anyway, because we need it. We can't be functional in any way without some form of creativity, even if it's, creativity is also mundane. This idea that you guys have been talking about earlier, that it doesn't have to be about creating something new. Creativity is in everything. There's art and interest, and creative just means, to me, with someone with synesthesia, it's just some squiggles and explosion-y things with a bit of color, and it's not really huge, big energy, but it can be, and it can be calm, and it can be mundane. And I think that's really, really important.
Between making a sandwich as a functional task and making a sandwich as a piece of art?
Absolutely.
Because it's not even how many tomatoes you put in, or interesting, it's actually about intention. It's actually about, the process and about that mindfulness. I'm thinking about Rosanna washing up again. There's art in the washing up. I'm sorry, and I think one of the reasons why creativity drops out of our day-to-day life is because it puts us at risk of sounding silly, right? It puts us at risk of being judged and being exposed. And I'm well aware that this conversation is live on LinkedIn, and I'm talking about making a sandwich as art. And that's important. That discomfort in me is important. There's somebody in my family who's a wonderful artist and stopped creating art because they couldn't sell it. And it breaks my heart. Breaks my heart. What a waste. I had a blog when my 14-year-old was a baby called The Big Sister's Guide to Parenting. And I wrote 1,000 words or more every day, sharing why raising children is like looking after curly hair. You can't change it. You just have to help it be its best self. Or everything I've learned about middle ear infections and everything in between, right? And it was so cathartic for me. And then somebody in my family said to me, you're not making money out of this and you're giving it X number of hours a day. If you're going to give something X number of hours a day, could it have a price tag attached to it, please? And it broke my heart to stop writing that blog. Well, the good news is that we've actually, Odette and I have just rejuvenated the blog. And I now write like, yes. And also my writing didn't go nowhere because the book that's coming out this year is something I'm really proud of. And I think when you read it, Dee's read a bit of it. It comes from the heart. Maybe there's something about speaking from your heart. Jen, I'm coming to you one second. There's another note that you touched just there. You mentioned about COVID, and you mentioned about humanity and how creativity is part of humanity for us. And I'm thinking about, how progress is born from creativity. And I'm thinking about whether or not you need purpose for creativity. And then I'm thinking about mental health. And I'm thinking about if we don't allow ourselves to express what's in our hearts and minds and give people vehicles for expressing what's in our hearts and minds, maybe that's the source of our mental health pandemic. Maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe if we taught people to dance and to draw and to write and to talk in ways that let them drop into a creative, meditative space, we would reduce the need for therapy. Jenna, go ahead.
Suppression is dangerous. Really, really dangerous.
Are you saying that lack of creativity are you equating lack of creativity with suppression?
Not directly.
Okay.
But creativity is a really amazing tool. And it's not just a tool, and we often talk about it, especially in the context of mental health, as a tool. But creativity doesn't have to be art, right? Creativity is just ideas or you, right? This idea that it's your blog is now worth something because you've turned it into a book. I think that's crap.
I know, I hear you.
Worth something. It doesn't matter if you never looked at it again. It doesn't matter if you did anything with it, because it's you, because it's important regardless. It doesn't have to go anywhere to mean something, to be useful. One of my young people who is incredibly intelligent has been thoroughly let down by the education system as a whole because they've fallen through all of these cracks, and that's a whole other thing. But she is someone who has this energy. She wants to fight, and she tends to resort to threatening Molotov cocktails, but she is someone who writing is now her tool. She writes letters to those people, and she is as vitriolic as she likes. She is as articulate as it ends up being, but those letters are never going to go anywhere. And afterwards, we sometimes redact the name of who it's to, or change it slightly so that there isn't any risk of sending it later in, as an adult, that drunken text or whatever, or, a moment of anger or whatever that comes up again. But just being able to think out loud, whether that's on paper, whether that's in the tech industry, it's often called rubber ducking because it's often to a literal rubber duck. I think that is part of it, and it's part of what makes us human, is that kind of connection with yourself and with others. And when I talk about suppression, I mean hiding. I mean forcing down the things that are not seen as valuable, as productive. And I use air quotes because it's pure extreme capitalism that puts that price tag on things, right? It's this sausage factory approach to education as a whole that we've been experiencing and stuck in for so long. And I mean, recently looking at Victorians and looking at classrooms in the Victorian era to now, some of my young people's classrooms genuinely, including the blackboard, look exactly the same. It's just that their blackboard flips around to become an interactive whiteboard.
Have you seen Prince EA's raps? So he's a performance poet, and I will share with you on the community afterwards. And if you're not on the community and you want to hear, look up Prince EA. And I think it's interesting as we start closing up the conversation, for me to share with you a distinction. Well, just based on what Jenna just said, and these ideas are coming from Seth Godin's work, is the difference between art and creativity. Okay, so where you're talking about suppression, talking about being in touch with yourself and potentially how that affects mental health, and also how it slows down our thinking and our intelligence. I wonder whether you could argue that creativity is that unlocking, whereas art is actually something that's shared. So when you said, Jenna, that saying that the blog is only meaningful when I say that it turned into a book. So I didn't really mean that. I meant the writing practice went somewhere else. But there was something really important to me about the shipping, about pressing publish. Yeah, there's something very special about the reader. There's something in art about the relationship. In English, we talk about readerliness, right, Rosanna? When we talk about, if you the reader does the creative work also. So we think about giving our students that opportunity to be on both sides of that relationship, where they understand that they've got a role to play in making connections and making things personal in the artistic relationship, whether they're engaging with maths or with literature or with languages. There's that synthesis that happens. So I'd love to wrap up this conversation by asking you each to think about what creativity and not art, what creativity means in your own tutoring context. And Jan, if it's all right with you, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think is it like how I use creativity, or how I encourage creativity in my
You know me far too well to ask me to clarify a question. Take it where you want it.
Yeah, that probably, I have some thoughts about how I encourage creativity in my tutoring. So first of all, at the very beginning of the class, I will tell everyone, don't judge each other. Because sometimes when the students, they feel like, oh, the other people might think I'm not saying the right thing, they won't actually use their creativity or express themselves freely. So first of all, I always set the groundwork saying that don't feel afraid that there's a right question. There's no right question or answer in the first place. So do feel free to tell us any of your thoughts. And secondly, I tend to avoid close-ended questions as much as I can. because usually students are so like how to say programmed in a way to think about what is the right answer to this closed-ended question, which is I see is usually the case in like Chinese public education. So in my class, I always ask like open-ended question, why you think like that? How do you think about other people's opinion, etc., etc. Yeah, so that's I think how I encourage creativity in my class.
That's beautiful. And I'm really glad that you hit that note about the cultural differences in attitudes to creativity, which I'm not knowledgeable enough to unpack. But I do think it's really important to recognize where your students are coming from and how to unlock their creativity, understanding where they, what hidden beliefs are sitting underneath and senses of value. So we very clearly said that in the UK, if you can spend it, it's got value, right? And you can't spend art, so does it have value becomes a thing. And that phrase that you used about programming, that they're programmed to be cautious in the way they answer you, is really interesting to understand how to reduce the impact of that programming. Dee, I'd love to go to you next if you don't mind.
I've had a bit of a light bulb moment, because it's suddenly dawned on me from several things that have been said in terms of the connections that we've made as the conversation has flowed, and the connections we like to make when we have conversations with people, and the connections we're trying to enable our students to make. The coaching training that I've embarked on, I as a coach am providing a safe space for my clients to explore and make their own connections, which means that they are unlocking perhaps their own creativity. And I'd never thought of it that way.
I am well
if I'm doing my job as a coach properly, that's exactly what I'm doing.
And if you're doing your job properly, it feels like an artist state. Yeah, because you hold space for them in the same way that going to an art gallery might do the trick. It's beautiful. Thank you, Jenna. Go ahead.
I think for me, the whole reason I do what I do is based in creativity. And it's part of everything that I do. And I think for me, it's also that being deliberate and being intentional about what I do, what we do, and what we build, and making sure that young people know and feel in every which way and are proven that in our space, in our time together, in our relationship, in that connection, that they are safe in every which way. And in turn, teaching them to and supporting them to lower their inhibitions and just take some risks and have some fun with it and be a kid again. And also, you mentioned about giving them a key to unlocking creativity. And I think it's more about supporting everyone that I come into contact with, and myself as well, that you don't need someone to give you a key. You can create it and carve it yourself out of everything and anything. And that's a really, really important thing to realize, that you are reliable, you can rely on yourself, and I think that's part of it and the foundation of creativity.
There's so much about safety and trust in what you've just said, and I think it's so beautiful. I think if we had another hour, we would notice that creativity is actually the key to unlocking ourselves, as opposed to unlocking creativity. So it's almost like getting a good handle on that key and how to use it. Rosanna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think to go back to what Jenna said about encouraging students to have fun as well, because fun and creativity are very much linked. And I think a good way to encourage your students to be creative is to model it yourself and not be worried about, having a bit of a joke around and having a laugh. Like the young Sheldon student, I think, I would like to think anyway, partly felt okay to use that example because I'm always using examples in lessons. I'm always showing them clips like, oh, this is how this was done in this TV show. Like if I did one the other day, I was teaching a philosophy class about what is knowledge. And if you just recite a bunch of things, does that make you smart? And I showed a clip of Joey in Friends when he's learned all these lines for this TV show that he's going to act in. And he's saying all this stuff about like art criticism and everything. And then Ross says to him, do you understand any of what you just said? And he's like, nope, but it sounds good. So, so using examples and kind of, not being afraid to have a laugh. And another kind of more practical thing that I encourage students to do is, if I get them to define terms or come up with their own thoughts, I always say, please do it in your own words. Don't just copy and paste what's on Wikipedia, or, you know, what this person said, and don't do the whole appeal to authority, like this person said it means this, so therefore they must be right. So trying to get them to do that, which can be quite challenging, but I think it's useful for them as an exercise.
Tell you what you've made me think of just there. So in our Foundations of Effective Tutoring course that you did in its very, very first iteration, what it now looks like is open-ended questions that the participants answer in their own time. And I'm the only person that sees them. And the answers are beautiful. They're always beautiful and deep and impressive. And I can see learning happening. And it would be so much easier for me to create a multiple choice quiz that self-marks and and I can't do it because I need them to do that thinking, and I need to give them that space. Otherwise the course doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And there's something about the don't copy it from Wikipedia, use your own words invitation there of like, let it change you. Yeah. So let's wrap up this conversation. Let's think about creativity as change and transformation. Let's think about creativity as our humanity. Let's think about creativity as the key to unlock our well-being and mental health. Let's think about creativity as a gift that we can give our students, and play and fun and freedom and non-judgmental, safe, trustful spaces as the context for all of that. And let's think about creativity as a vital, missing tool for our next generations. And if we can bring a little bit of that into the way that we work and into the way that we live, we'll all benefit. I really, really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. I feel seen.
Me too.
Appreciated. And
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
So inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosanna. Thanks, Jenna.
See you
Thanks,
next week.
thanks,
Bye.
Bye.
You
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Bye.